Most people spend their lives chasing outcomes. They measure their worth by promotions, grades, income, recognition, or how fast they can achieve a goal. They live in a constant cycle of comparing themselves to others, worrying about where they stand, and questioning whether they're moving fast enough. But elite performers think differently. They redirect their attention away from obsessing over where they want to end up and toward mastering the process that gets them there. They understand that results are not created in moments of achievement. They are built quietly in the process long before the world sees them. When your mind is fixed on the end goal, you unknowingly place yourself under a heavy emotional burden. You create unnecessary pressure, self-doubt, and fear of failure. Every obstacle feels personal. Every delay feels threatening. Every mistake feels like proof that you are not good enough. You begin to judge yourself not by your effort or growth, but by how close you are to an outcome that may still be months or years away. And because that result hasn't arrived yet, you constantly feel behind, stressed, or frustrated, even if you're actually making progress. This outcome-driven mindset turns progress into a scoreboard rather than a journey. Instead of asking how much you've grown, you ask why you haven't arrived yet. Instead of learning from mistakes, you fear them. Instead of building confidence through effort, you wait for external validation to tell you that you are doing well. And the more you focus on the outcome, the more distant and overwhelming it begins to feel. But when you shift your focus from the outcome to the process, to the habits you build, the systems you follow, the routines you commit to, and the daily actions you repeat, everything changes. Your effort becomes more consistent because the reward is no longer far away in the future. Your confidence becomes internal because it is rooted in your actions, not in someone else's approval. Your growth becomes inevitable because you are no longer depending on motivation. You are guided by discipline, intention, and structure. Process-focused people live differently. They don't wake up each day asking, "Did I win?" They ask, "Did I get better?" And that question removes the fear of failure. It removes the urgency to prove something instantly. It shifts the mind from anxiety to improvement, from pressure to purpose, from chasing success to becoming the kind of person who naturally produces it. The truth is, the outcome is never fully in your control. Markets change, people change, timing changes, circumstances shift. You may work incredibly hard and still not see an immediate reward, but the process is always yours. Your habits are yours. Your work ethic is yours. Your discipline is yours. And when you fall in love with the process, you give yourself power over the only thing that has ever truly created success: who you are becoming each day. Think about an athlete training for competition. The world only sees the final performance. They judge the medal, the score, the moment under bright lights. But the real transformation doesn't happen there. It happens in the early mornings, in silent gyms, in repetitive drills, in endless practice sessions where no applause exists. If that athlete focused only on the outcome, every bad training day would feel like a failure. But because they are committed to the process, even a difficult day is meaningful because it is still part of becoming better. The same applies to students, entrepreneurs, leaders, creators, and professionals. When you obsess over grades instead of learning, you memorize rather than understand. When you obsess over revenue instead of value, you chase quick wins instead of building something lasting. When you obsess over recognition instead of contribution, you lose passion and authenticity. But when you focus on the process, deep learning, meaningful work, consistent improvement, excellence begins to compound quietly over time. A process-focused mindset changes your relationship with effort. Instead of seeing effort as something painful or exhausting, you begin to see it as proof that you are moving forward. Instead of resenting repetition, you understand that repetition is the foundation of mastery. Instead of trying to rush results, you learn patience, discipline, and emotional resilience. You stop asking, "How fast can I get there?" and start asking, "How well can I do the work today?" And something powerful happens when you do that. Discipline slowly turns into momentum. Consistency slowly turns into progress. Progress eventually turns into achievement. And achievement no longer feels like a miracle or a lucky break. It feels like the natural outcome of who you have become through your process. When you focus on the outcome, failure feels final. But when you focus on the process, failure becomes feedback. You stop running from mistakes and start studying them. You understand that setbacks are not interruptions to success. They are ingredients in it. They refine your approach, sharpen your awareness, and strengthen your commitment. Every challenge becomes a lesson. Every delay becomes a test of patience. Every obstacle becomes an invitation to grow rather than a reason to quit. This mindset also strengthens your identity. Instead of identifying yourself by what you have achieved, you identify yourself by how you show up. You see yourself as someone who works hard, who grows, who persists, who learns, who improves, regardless of what happens externally. That identity is far more powerful than any single accomplishment. Accomplishments can be lost, outdated, or outdone, but who you become through the process stays with you forever. When you focus on process, you also begin to enjoy the journey more. You notice small wins. You celebrate progress. You feel proud of your effort instead of ashamed of where you aren't yet. You start to realize that life is not lived only at the finish line. It is lived in the steps along the way. The long nights, the quiet mornings, the hours of practice, the moments of reflection, these experiences shape you in ways that outcomes never could. The irony is that when you finally stop chasing outcomes and start honoring the process, the outcomes begin to improve anyway. Not because you forced them, but because excellence becomes woven into your habits. Success becomes a reflection of your character, your discipline, your patience, and your willingness to stay committed when results aren't visible yet. Process-focused people don't wait for the perfect moment to act. They don't rely on bursts of motivation. They understand that small, consistent actions, repeated daily, create far greater change than intense effort done occasionally. They structure their environment, build routines that support their goals, and create systems that make good behavior automatic rather than dependent on willpower. They ask themselves simple but powerful questions. Did I show up today? Did I improve even a little? Did I learn something? Did I stay committed to my values? These questions guide them forward, even on days when progress feels slow or invisible. Because the truth is, most breakthroughs don't feel like breakthroughs while they're happening. They feel like repetition, effort, practice, and patience. They feel like ordinary days stacked on top of one another until one day the world calls them extraordinary. The simple shift from outcome-focused thinking to process-focused thinking doesn't remove ambition. It doesn't lower standards. In fact, it raises them. It deepens your commitment. It strengthens your character. It makes you more consistent, more resilient, more grounded, and ultimately more effective. You stop performing for approval and start performing for growth. You stop chasing validation and start building competence. And when you live this way long enough, the outcome eventually takes care of itself because excellence has become your habit, not a lucky moment or a sudden breakthrough. Your success becomes sustainable, repeatable, and rooted in who you are rather than what you achieve on any single day. That is the power of shifting from chasing results to mastering the process. It is the difference between temporary success and lasting performance. It is the difference between pressure and purpose. It is the difference between waiting to feel accomplished and becoming the kind of person who creates accomplishment through consistent, intentional action. And once you make that shift, your performance doesn't just improve, it transforms because you finally understand that the real victory is not only in reaching the destination, but in who you become while walking the path. Most people rely on motivation to determine when they take action. They wait for the right mood, the right burst of inspiration, or the right emotional spark before they begin working toward their goals. They tell themselves they will start when they feel ready, when they feel energized, when the timing feels perfect. But motivation is emotional, unpredictable, and temporary. It rises and falls with mood, circumstance, and environment. It can push you forward one day and disappear entirely the next. High performers understand this, and instead of building their lives around motivation, they build their lives around identity-based behavior. There is a powerful difference between saying, "I will try to be disciplined," and saying, "I am a disciplined person." The first statement depends on effort, willpower, and emotional strength in the moment. The second statement becomes part of who you are. Identity shifts how you act under pressure, how you respond to setbacks, how you handle boredom, and how you behave when no one is watching. It changes the standard you live by, not because someone else expects it from you, but because you expect it from yourself. When your actions are driven by motivation, your behavior fluctuates with your feelings. On good days, you may work hard, stay focused, and push yourself forward. On bad days, when you feel tired, discouraged, or unmotivated, your progress slows or stops completely. You begin to see yourself as inconsistent, unreliable, or easily distracted, not because you lack potential, but because you are relying on an emotional fuel source that was never meant to last. Identity-driven action works differently. Once your actions align with who you believe yourself to be, you no longer have to push yourself constantly. Your identity begins to pull you forward. You act in alignment with your self-image. If you see yourself as a disciplined person, you behave with discipline. If you see yourself as a learner, you continue learning. If you see yourself as someone who honors commitments, you follow through even when it's difficult. You don't work out because you happen to feel motivated today. You work out because you are the kind of person who values their health. You don't study because there is a deadline approaching. You study because you are the kind of person who pursues mastery. You don't practice your craft only when inspiration strikes. You practice because you are the kind of person who respects growth, excellence, and long-term development. This shift may appear small on the surface, but it transforms your performance at the deepest level. Motivation demands emotional energy. Identity creates behavioral consistency. When you rely on motivation, you constantly negotiate with yourself. You ask, "Do I feel like doing this today?" But when your actions come from identity, the question disappears. You don't debate whether to act. You simply follow the standard of the person you believe you are. Identity is powerful because it rewires your internal dialogue. Instead of thinking, "I hope I can stay disciplined," you think, "This is who I am, so this is what I do." You stop chasing temporary bursts of motivation and begin living from a deeper foundation of values, principles, and self-expectation. This internal alignment strengthens your resilience. When you face difficulty or fatigue, you don't retreat. You remind yourself of your identity. Identity also changes how you perceive setbacks. When motivation drives your behavior and you fail, you begin to believe you are not capable enough. You see failure as proof that you lack discipline or strength. But when identity drives your behavior, failure becomes an event, not a definition. You can make mistakes and still remain aligned with who you are. A disciplined person may miss a day, but they return the next day because discipline is part of their identity, not a temporary effort. Over time, your identity shapes your habits, and your habits reinforce your identity. Each disciplined action becomes a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. Each act of commitment strengthens your belief in yourself. Each decision made with intention becomes evidence that you are not waiting for motivation. You are choosing character over convenience. Think about someone who identifies as an athlete. They don't train only when they feel excited about practice. They train because that is what athletes do. Think about a writer who sees themselves as an artist of words. They don't write only when inspiration feels magical. They write because writing is part of who they are. Think about a leader who identifies as someone who serves others and takes responsibility. They don't show up only when conditions are comfortable. They show up because leadership is an expression of identity, not a reaction to motivation. Identity brings consistency because identity is stable even when emotions are not. Motivation can disappear in moments of stress, fatigue, or discouragement, but identity remains. It becomes a quiet, steady force that guides your choices. It influences your habits, your discipline, your priorities, and your level of effort. It shapes the kind of environments you place yourself in and the kind of people you surround yourself with. When you adopt identity-driven action, you also raise your internal standards. You no longer measure success only by outcomes, achievements, or recognition. You measure it by alignment with who you want to be. You begin to ask different questions. Did I act in alignment with my values today? Did I show integrity? Did I remain committed to the standards I hold for myself? These questions cultivate accountability from the inside out, not from external reward systems. Identity-driven action also protects you against burnout in a unique way. Motivation often pushes people into intense bursts of effort followed by exhaustion or collapse. They sprint emotionally, burn out mentally, and then lose momentum altogether. But when your behavior flows from identity, you build sustainable effort. You pace yourself not because you are doing less, but because you are anchored in something deeper than urgency or impulse. You also stop performing for validation. When someone relies on motivation, they often depend on praise, excitement, or recognition to keep going. But when identity shapes your actions, your commitment exists even when no one notices. You hold yourself to your standards privately, quietly, and consistently. Your integrity strengthens because you are not acting for approval. You are acting from authenticity. The story you tell yourself about who you are becomes the foundation of your performance. If you tell yourself you are inconsistent, you will behave inconsistently. If you tell yourself you lack discipline, you will act accordingly. But when you intentionally define your identity in alignment with your goals, you change the direction of your behavior before you even take action. Identity becomes a compass. It guides your decisions, influences your habits, and shapes your long-term trajectory. And as your identity strengthens, your environment begins to reflect it. You start choosing actions, routines, and relationships that support who you believe you are. You avoid distractions that conflict with your identity, not because someone told you to avoid them, but because they no longer align with your self-image. Your life becomes more intentional. Your priorities become clearer. Your choices become more aligned with your long-term values rather than short-term emotions. Over time, identity-driven action leads to transformation that feels natural rather than forced. You don't constantly fight against yourself. You don't need to gather motivation every day like fuel for a fire that keeps burning out. Instead, your identity fuels your consistency. You act with greater confidence because you trust yourself. You move with greater stability because you stand on a stronger foundation. You no longer depend on emotional highs to move forward. You move because forward is who you are. By changing the story you tell yourself about who you are, you upgrade your standards, your habits, and ultimately your performance. You become someone who does not simply try to succeed, but someone who embodies the qualities that create success again and again. You become someone who does not merely chase moments of discipline, but someone who lives with discipline as a natural expression of identity. And when identity leads the way, your life no longer feels like a battle between who you are and who you want to become, because the two begin to merge. Your actions align with your values. Your habits reflect your vision. Your behavior matches your beliefs. And in that alignment, your growth becomes not just possible, but inevitable.